Hi, everybody. This is Ronelle. I'm going to talk to you about my favorite subject today. It's called the Lindbergh Kidnapping. Any of you know me, you know I'm crazy about this subject because I'm writing a book for 20 years. But I do have a website on the internet. It's www.lindberghkidnappinghoax.com. And I started that website in 1998. It's a long story, and when I write a memoir, I'll include that experience. It was quite a thing for somebody my age to create a website on the internet with hundreds of documents. And I'm still interested in the subject because nobody knows today, and nobody ever will, most likely, nobody ever will know exactly how the baby, Lindbergh's baby, died. So the book I'm going to talk about is the story I'm going to tell you is my interpretation, my version. Well, it's my assessment of the case using other books and other photos. I have about 130 pictures to show you in a slideshow any moment. As soon as I switch the screen, I'm going to show them to you. This is the book that I made my website over. This book blew me away when I read it in 1994. I could not believe, having grown up in the 50s, thinking about Lindbergh as the great American hero. I knew nothing basically about him. I read this book in 1994 and found out that Lindbergh probably killed his own child. That Richard Hauptmann, Richard Hauptmann, a man who never used the name Bruno. The newspapers called him that because that's the name he was born with. But Richard Hauptmann in America, even as a child in Germany, was known as Richard Hauptmann. And he went to the electric chair, as most of you heard. He was found guilty at a trial in New Jersey for killing Lindbergh's child. Nobody today believes that he got a fair trial. Nobody believes that, most people don't believe he got a fair trial. But also most people think that he had accomplices. I don't think he had accomplices. I think he was completely innocent, but I'm not going to tell you all my secrets tonight. This is the book. It's written by Stephen Monier and Gregory Algren. 1994, they published this blockbuster story of their investigation. If they were investigating the Lindbergh kidnapping today, well, 20 years ago when they wrote this book, they would have suspected the father of the missing baby. He was supposedly kidnapped out of the house in New Jersey that you're looking at on the cover. Somebody supposedly put a ladder up to the baby's window in the nursery, took him out, killed him. Algren and Monier have decided, after collaborating on this investigation, as if they were doing it today, that it was probably a prank that Lindbergh was pulling on his wife. He was a terrible prankster, and he did terrible things to people throughout his life. And they have taken the idea that this was just one more prank, but it went wrong. He dropped the baby down the ladder. The baby was dead, and he had to make up a story. And so he went inside the house and told everybody the baby had been kidnapped. That's possible. So let's look at the pictures. This is a wonderful book. But I'm going to talk about other books, other theories, and I hope I can finish my book and add to all of the confusion. It's a real quagmire, but I'll try to set you straight with a lot of photographs. And let's see, I have to share the screen. This is all new technology for me. There it is. Okay, so this is the address for my website, www.lindberghkidnappinghoax.com. Algren and Monier have nothing to do with my website. I should have mentioned that. Their book, Crime of the Century, The Lindbergh Kidnapping Hoax, I took the subtitle of their book and I made my own website, and I didn't know them when I did it. I've never met them. I just love their idea. So, I don't know how many of you can recognize what's wrong with this daily news cover. The headlines are screaming. If this was a voice, you would have needed earplugs. Look how loud it blares. Lindbergh kidnapper jailed. When I show this photo to my audiences, I ask them what's wrong with this picture? What's wrong with these headlines from the Daily News? It's September 19th, 1934. What's wrong with it? I'll give you a second to look at it. I know you're going to tell me, if you were sitting here with me, that kidnapper is spelled incorrectly. Well, that's the way they spelled it back then for some reason I don't understand. That's not why I'm asking the question. You should realize, looking at these daily news headlines, that a person, whoever they are, wherever they're from, is not a kidnapper when they're jailed. He had just been arrested and put in jail. Is he a kidnapper yet? I hope you say no. I hope you understand why this is horrible. He was accused from the day he was arrested as a kidnapper without a trial. There he is in his mugshot. Let's see if I can remove this from the screen. That's Richard Hauptmann from the website, from his mugshot, and he was beaten. By the time they took this picture, his eye is all swollen. You can't really tell, but he's been beaten terribly. Another photo. This is, I believe, from his trial. So why do I put a photo of William Randolph Hearst? You all know who he is, the great newspaper operator and billionaire, and he had a castle in California. Well, it's William Randolph Hearst who hired the lawyer that's going to supposedly defend Richard Hauptmann in New Jersey after he's arrested 3 years after the kidnapping, actually 2.5 years. The kidnapping takes place on March 1st, 1932. And Richard Hauptmann is arrested in September of 1934. And when he is arrested, his wife, Anna, finds a decent lawyer. They didn't have very much money to hire fancy lawyers. But William Randolph Hearst, the publisher of 1 million, I don't know how many newspapers, he sent her his own lawyer for the exchange of getting the scoop from the lawyer. It turns out to be a guy named Ed Riley from Brooklyn, and Ed Riley will be Hauptmann's defense attorney, unfortunately for him. This is Anna Hauptmann. She lived to be quite old. She was 96 when she passed away. And the reason that I'm showing you this photograph of her much older is because in the 1970s, it turned out that several investigative reporters from the New York Post and other people began looking into the archives of the trial that her husband was sentenced from and found guilty in. And many people began to see problems, as if there were no problems in the day. Of course there were. People recognized all the problems. The cameras were there, the newspaper. It was a circus. In Flemington, New Jersey in 1935, January, February 1935 was the trial of the century. So Anna Hauptmann, here is the jury. They're not very educated people, but they found him guilty very quickly. They were enthralled by all of the celebrities that attended this trial. Everybody attended. Walter Winchell and Damon Runyon and actresses from Hollywood, and yeah, everybody was there. This is the courthouse in Flemington, New Jersey. Every now and then they used to have retrials, staged trials, redoing Hauptmann's and reenacting it. And this is the crowd. Look at them, all fancy dressed, and people selling ladders, little makeshift ladders outside the courthouse. It was a zoo, it was a circus, it was an atrocity. They were yelling and screaming, "Kill Hauptmann, kill Hauptmann." And the jury during lunch break would have to cross the street to the restaurant in the hotel and go through this mob. And in the restaurant, they'd had to listen to, I mean, when do you not sequester a jury? They were barely sequestered. They could hear everything people were saying. There was a bare curtain between them and the other diners in the restaurant. It's really such an unfair trial. This is Anna Hauptmann with one of the lawyers. I'm sorry, I don't remember who he is, but that's his wife. At the time, they had a young baby, and there he is, Bobby Manfred, who is still alive today, living in Pennsylvania, in the Amish area, Lancaster, somewhere in that area. He speaks nothing of this, has never come forward publicly. There's the same photograph again. During the trial, Anna tried to get sympathy with the news people who took photographs like this because they had to counter all of the bad propaganda that the newspapers dished out. And this is the child that died. His body was discovered, it was March 1st, 1932, and he's discovered May 12th, 1932, something like 79, 80 days later. 1 mile. If you walked from the house, it was about 1 mile. If you drove, it was 4 miles. The baby, he's not a baby, he's a toddler. He was walking, supposedly walking and talking, but we'll never really know because there aren't any photographs showing this very much. The movies that you can see, if you go on Google, show the child holding on to his crib and looking out of a window and holding on to the crib. But whether or not he actually walked, well, we don't really know. We don't know a lot of things about this child. The reason being that Charles Lindbergh cremated the remains as soon as it was found. Half a day later, the baby was cremated, and a lot of people to this day believe it wasn't the real baby because it was unrecognizable mostly. This is Charles and Anne Lindbergh, and they were famous because they flew around together. But if you look at this picture, he's looking one way, she's looking the other way. He's sort of scowling like he always does. He hated the press, hated them. There was a war between Charles Lindbergh, the famous pilot who flew to Paris in 1927, all alone, solo, across the Atlantic Ocean. And ever since then, he just hates the press. But we're going to find out, as Monier and Algren point out in the book, and other authors have pointed this out, for a man who hated the press, the minute his child goes missing, he's suddenly inviting them into his home, making them his wife made them coffee and sandwiches. But look at this photograph. Anne is looking somewhere off. He's looking somewhere off. And I'm telling you now, I have looked at at least 1,000 photographs of this married couple who were world famous. They flew around the earth together. What a romantic marriage they must have had. Yeah, well, think again. There's no photograph that can be found that I know of after 20 years of looking for them in which they're even holding hands. There's not a single photograph that you can find. If you do, please let me know at Ronelle, rdelmont@comcast.net. Please send me an email if you find a photograph where Charles has even a hand or a finger on her shoulder, even his brushing next to her, body to body. There is no photograph like that. It's just remarkable. Well, it's not remarkable, it's quite sad. This is the home. I took a photo this is my photo from May of 2000 when I entered this house and went inside. It belongs to the state of New Jersey, as the Lindberghs granted this homestead of 400 acres, which they built while they were flying around the earth. Someone was building this house and they came home And they never lived here, but this is the house that the child was supposedly abducted from. This is the front view. They gave it over to the state of New Jersey to use as a boys' home. And it became the Elias Home for Boys, wayward boys, boys who can't function in school. It's a very good idea. I don't know whether or not it worked, but this is what it looks like in the present day. And I've been there many times. I haven't been inside many times, but I was only inside once. This is the view after the home was built, and you can see all the trees and how isolated it is. It's country. It's New Jersey in the Sowland Mountains. Let's see, this is not the view from which you can see the nursery, so let's go. Now, this is Anthony Scaduto. He was an investigative journalist. Unfortunately, he just passed away, but he's the one who actually discovered anomalies in the trial, in the police investigation. There are thousands of documents in the archive of New Jersey pertaining to and from Hauptmann's trial. And Anthony Scaduto wrote a book, and it's called Scapegoat. There it is. The Lonesome Death of Bruno Richard Hauptmann. Hauptmann was innocent. His conviction for the Lindbergh baby kidnapping was a frame-up. That's what he wrote about. And because he wrote this book in the late 70s, that's what made Anna Hauptmann bring a lawsuit to the state of New Jersey, to the police department of New Jersey, to individuals, the attorney general, the ex-attorney general, the man who prosecuted her husband, David Wilentz, was in his 90s at the time. And Anna Hauptmann brought the lawsuit based on the evidence from Anthony Scaduto's book, that the police framed her husband. He had no chance at that trial. He really didn't. Even if you think he was guilty, you have to understand, you do understand when you read the transcript and you realize how they operated in putting him on trial. That's another story in itself. So I just want to warn you, if you get involved in this, you'll be there studying the transcript and reading all these books for the rest of your life. This is the man who was he was the police chief of the state of New Jersey. And you can see his name is Schwarzkopf, H. Norman Schwarzkopf Sr. He is the father. His son was just born at this time. His name is H. Norman Schwarzkopf Jr., the famous general I believe he's no longer alive, from the Persian Gulf War. But H. Norman Schwarzkopf Sr. was the head of the police. He was the superintendent of the state of New Jersey. And his experience in crime hunting was as a floor walker in Bamberger's department store in Newark. He had no training in criminal investigation, really. And there he is again, because later, after the trial, years later, he goes into the army during the war, ends up training the Shah's military private army. There he is with a big smile. He was famous for saying, "There was no oath I would break for Charles Lindbergh." They all idolized Charles Lindbergh. So when they were called to his house on the night of the kidnapping in the middle of that forest, all the police officers were told by Lindbergh, holding a gun at their faces or above their heads, "Whoever disobeys me is going to get shot." So yes, this is the big surprise that nobody knows about. Well, now they know, but until Monier and Algren wrote the book, I don't think people were terribly aware that Lindbergh commandeered the investigation. Others have written about it, of course, but the problem is Schwarzkopf, who allowed Lindbergh, the father of the missing baby, the supposedly kidnapped baby, he allowed him to run the show, the investigation, looking for the child. And Schwarzkopf took orders from Charles Lindbergh, as did all the other cops. The New Jersey there were so many police departments involved, Newark Police, New York Police, the FBI. They were all running around the grounds trying to find this child. The Jersey City Police, everybody was a free-for-all competition. There is the son of H. Norman Schwarzkopf Sr. This is Jr. And this is David Wilentz that Anna Hauptmann sued. In the 1980s, he was still alive in his, 1988. I think she brought the lawsuit around 1987, so he was in his late 90s, and this is a very good-looking young man who was ruthless in his prosecution. The one thing that jumps out at me every time I see his picture and every time I think about him, there are many things to say about David Wilentz and his prosecution and his behavior and all of that. But the thing that really upsets me, that I can never forget, is how he told the jury, as Hauptmann, who had a German accent, did not really understand a lot of English clearly, didn't understand legalese, that's for sure. And he had no interpreter there at the trial. They didn't give him one. But David Wilentz said to the jury that no American could have killed this child. He had to be a foreigner. Now, David Wilentz was born in Latvia, was brought to America as a child by his parents. How he had the nerve, without blushing. Well, maybe he blushed. I wasn't there and nobody wrote about it, so who knows if he blushed or not. He had the chutzpah, the nerve, to call the murderer of this child had to be a foreigner. And look at the man look at the defendant. He's a foreigner. Yes, despicable behavior. Nobody could condone that kind of prosecution. This is, now when Anna Hauptmann brought her lawsuit against the state of New Jersey in the 1980s, they appealed to the Supreme Court. Her lawyer's name is Robert Bryan. He practices out in California these days. But Robert Bryan and Anna Hauptmann, based on Anthony Scaduto's investigation, they brought a lawsuit and appealed to the Supreme Court of the state of New Jersey. Well, this man was the chief of the Supreme Court Chief Justice, and his name is Robert Wilentz. Yep, he's the son of the man who prosecuted Anna Hauptmann's husband, the man who put him in the electric chair, who prosecuted him viciously. This is his son, who, even though I believe he recused himself from the appeal in the 1980s, all the other justices in New Jersey could not have possibly said yes to Anna Hauptmann's appeal. And they protected David Wilentz's legacy. He became very, very powerful politically from that trial. His children became very successful because of his success. And it's rather sad. And this is the Supreme Court. This is the Chief Justice, Robert Wilentz. And this is Brendan Byrne. And I like this guy. I don't know much about his politics, and I never lived in the state of New Jersey. He was the governor in the 80s when Anna Hauptmann brought her lawsuit and the Supreme Court refused to listen. They rejected it. Brendan Byrne said, okay, Americans, you're worried, you're wondering about the kidnapping? All right, well, I'm going to give you all the documents. And he opened up the entire archive, all the papers, everything pertaining to and from the trial. He put it in public hands. It's in this building, which I have been to many times. Public documents. They're available to you and me and the man in the moon and Santa Claus. Of course, you got to make an appointment and you've got to be a serious researcher, but this is the state police in Trenton, New Jersey. They're building. This is the museum that they put up, and you can see down here, there's a ladder This is the word Lindbergh up here in baby building blocks. And everything in this showcase is a history lesson about that trial. So lots of children go there and lots of big people go there. You can sit in the electric chair. That's disgusting, but they do have it there. It's called Old Smoky. And this is the archive containing all the documents. And I've been inside. This is the archive that if you make an appointment with Mark Falzini, the curator, you can look for anything you want to find. Like who was the killer of the Lindbergh baby? This is the sleeping suit the child was supposedly wearing the night he went missing from his crib. I'm sure that this is not the original sleeping suit, but that's a whole big story by itself. This is what was shown to Anne Lindbergh at the trial 2.5 years later, and she said, yes, this is the suit that my son was wearing, and I'm sure it's not. And this is this is a little t-shirt that was found on the corpse. And this is how they decided that it was the right child, because it was unrecognizable. There was blonde hair on the corpse, but that was it. Blonde hair, parts of the body were missing, arms, legs, inside. I mean, it's very atrocious because the animals in the forest had gotten to the corpse, evidently. But this t-shirt was made by the baby's nanny. Her name was Betty Gow. She watched over the child day and night. The boy's parents, his name, by the way, I didn't tell you, was Charles Lindbergh Jr. And little Charlie thought that his nursemaid was his mother because his mother was flying around the earth with Daddy. And so many months he was alone with the nursemaid, Betty Gow, an unmarried, young, very pretty woman from Scotland. She took care of him, and she made this little t-shirt the night they put him to sleep. Anne Morrow, Anne Lindbergh, the mother, and Betty Gow, the nursemaid. Both of them put the child to bed around 7:30 at night on a Monday or a Tuesday. I forget what night of the week. It's either a Monday or a Tuesday, which they never stayed in that house ever. They would come for weekends and leave by Sunday, but the child supposedly had a cold. And Betty Gow rubbed his little chest with Vicks Vapor Rub, and she said later she didn't want the baby's sleeping suit to get sticky. So she made a little flannel shirt, and this flannel shirt was so unusual with blue thread. It was homemade, so there were no two of them. Like the sleeping suit, you could have bought in Macy's 100 of them, or Gimbels. But this little nightshirt under the sleeping suit is really what identified the child's remains because it was unique. And this is the ladder. I took photos of this May 2000. This is the fold-up ladder, the nesting ladder. It's three pieces. It folds into itself. And nobody knows where this ladder came from. They claim at the trial it was supposedly, and here is the board. Okay, let me explain. This ladder is a homemade ladder. But the police claim they discovered in Hauptmann's attic after they arrested him, this board down here from Hauptmann's attic, they said, matches one of the rails in this ladder. And that is how they got him to New Jersey. There was a ransom paid in a cemetery, and Hauptmann was spending bills that were from the ransom cash. And he had $14,000 in ransom money hidden in his garage. Well, that means he was involved somehow in the ransom blackmail. But to kill a baby, you needed better proof than that to get him into New Jersey rather than the Bronx where he was living. Because dirty money in the Depression, let's remember this is 1932, during the Depression, plenty of people had dirty counterfeit money. All kinds of money was being sold on the streets. And just because Hauptmann had ransom bills, which he unfortunately used to buy gasoline uh, one day, and the bill matched the ransom bills that was paid in April of 1932, supposedly to one of the kidnappers in a cemetery in the Bronx. And so when he went into, how am I going to explain this? When he was arrested, he claimed he had no idea this money was Lindbergh money. I'll tell you what he said later, but he could not have been tried for murder in the Bronx. The baby went missing in New Jersey. So in order to get him into the state of New Jersey to put him on trial for murder rather than extortion with the money in the Bronx, the police had to find a way to connect him to the murder. And they went up into the attic of his apartment. He lived on the top floor of a 2-story house. He was renting it. And they went into the attic and discovered that one of the boards in the attic matched the ladder. This is what they claimed at the trial. This was evidence at his trial, and it convinced the jury that he was guilty. Here is the ladder taken apart. It's being inspected by a wood expert. It's in 3 pieces. It's a homemade ladder. And notice how far apart the rungs are. Ahlgren and Monier are saying in their book that Lindbergh built this ladder. He was 6'2", and if he were climbing a ladder, he would be comfortable with rungs that are this far apart. An ordinary person of average height would never build a ladder with rungs that far apart. So that was a good point in Ahlgren and Monier's book. Here is my photograph of close-ups of this ladder. There it is folded up in the museum. And as you could see, the board from his attic is lying here on the side. The jury was told that this board matches the board you'll see later. There it is again on the side. Here is the attic board. They had this at the trial, and they had a wood expert who said it matches, and they believed him. There's the electric chair. Very sad. There should not be death penalty for any crime in America. No other country has this death penalty anymore. And the reason I say that is because very often you put somebody to death, and then later there are questions about their guilt. And especially in the case of Richard Hauptmann, as you understand so far, even if you're confused listening to me, you can understand why there are questions about his guilt. They put him to death. Well, he was arrested September 19th, 1934, and he was put to death April 36. Nobody today goes to death. Nobody is executed that quickly. It can take 20 years to put someone to death with all the appeals, but they rushed Richard Hauptmann into this chair, put him to death, and now we're still dealing with, was he or wasn't he? This is a thumb guard. I know it's hard to imagine, and you can't really make head or tails out of this if you've never heard of it. But this contraption is metal, wired, heavy, I guess it's aluminum. It's a thumb guard, and it's got these cords. And when the Lindbergh child was put to sleep each night by the nanny in his sleeping suit, she put this part around his thumb. Little Charlie was not allowed to suck his thumb, and I suspect he was also not allowed to touch his little pee-pee. Masturbation and thumb sucking were horrific ideas back then, and you raised a child to be in a strict way, as the Lindberghs did, and you put him to bed like that with this thumb guard on each thumb. The string is wrapped around his wrist so he cannot suck his thumb or touch himself. He was almost 2 years old. He wasn't a baby anymore. He was a toddler. And this is the thumb guard. There it is in my hand. maybe that's someone else's hand, but I took this picture. And it was one of the pieces of evidence at the trial. Now, this is a police photograph of the crib in which the child was put to sleep. And as you can see, I wrote up here, sun lamp missing from photo. The sun lamp is actually sticking out. You can sort of see the shade here. This child not only went to bed with his thumbs covered in metal and pinned down, the blanket was pinned around his neck so he couldn't move, pinned to the sheet. And then they put a sun lamp over him. Why? Well, here it is. The child, we now know, because of all of this evidence that Brendan Byrne released to the public, other authors, many people have gone there and written books over the years, and we now know that the child had rickets. The child's doctor wrote a letter to his grandmother who lived in Englewood, New Jersey. The Morrows were very, very wealthy people. Anne Morrow's mother was a widow, and she wanted to know about the child, so she wrote to the doctor who had seen the child 2 weeks or 3 weeks before he went missing. So we have a copy of the letter from the pediatrician, Dr. Philip Van Ingen, one of the greatest pediatricians of his day. And he told the grandmother that when he saw Charlie only 3 weeks or so before the kidnapping, the child would not stand up. Oh, he was a spoiled child, you know, and he wouldn't stand up for me to measure him. And he tells her that the baby had rickets, a rickety condition. So think to yourself, what is rickets? It is a disease that occurs from malnutrition, lack of sunshine, lack of vitamin D, malnourished children. Who are the malnourished children? The children of billionaires? The children of millionaires? Absolutely not. He had a full-time nanny feeding him, taking care of him, plenty of sunshine, plenty of outdoor life. Why did this child have rickets? Why was there a sun lamp giving him the vitamin C, whatever the sun lamp, the sunshine that he lacked? What was wrong with this child? And those were the rumors that I'm sure you've heard about. There were rumors floating everywhere at the time that something was wrong. The child was deaf, the child was mute, the child was whatever. We don't know, do we? This is the ransom note that Lindbergh claimed was sitting on the windowsill. It was March 1st, 1932, and if you look up the weather, the wind was howling. It was a very cold night. How in the world did the kidnapper climb up that ladder, go through the window, take the baby out of the crib without it crying? There was a dog in the house that never barked. And then he put the baby down the ladder with himself, took the baby out somehow. When the child was found dead in the woods, there was a burlap sack nearby, so perhaps he was put in a burlap sack, taken down the ladder, he dropped the sack, the baby's head cracked. Who knows? We don't know. But one thing I can tell you is not kosher about this entire story is this ransom note. This is the first one of about a dozen. This note, Lindbergh claimed to find on the windowsill. How in the world did the guy get out the window, go down this ridiculous ladder that the police could not reproduce? The police made many versions of this ladder and tried to get into the house and out of the room with a sack containing a 30-pound whatever, and they couldn't replicate it. At least maybe somebody did, but not easily. It wasn't possible. And how did Lindbergh claim? There was nobody who saw this note on a windowsill. Nobody saw it. He claimed to find it there, and here's the amazing part. The most disturbing part is that he did not open it. It was sealed. The flap was glued. There was no writing on the envelope, but it's a kidnap ransom note, obviously. The father of the missing baby. You've got to think about this. What father who wants to find his baby real bad, supposedly, is running around with a rifle, running around with every cop. There's more police are coming by the minute into this house. Reporters are showing up. Everybody's 100 people, few hundred people are eventually going to be there. And how can he walk around for 2 hours? But before he allows anyone to open this envelope, it's midnight. The police officer, Sergeant Kelly, shows up with the bag that has the powder to look for fingerprints. And it's after midnight by the time Lindbergh allows the police. Yes, you heard me right. He doesn't allow the police to. I'm not kidding. Yes, people wanted to bring their bloodhounds, and he said no. J. Edgar Hoover shows up later, and he says no. He was in charge. Did he really want to find his son? Obviously not. I mean, it's as plain. You don't have to go to school to know this. It's just human nature to suspect the father of a missing child who doesn't open the ransom note for 2 whole hours and is ordering the police around and refusing to have bloodhounds search the property for the missing child. I don't know why I'm laughing. It's just 20 years. I'm going crazy with this story already. So here's the problem. Dear sir, have $50,000 ready. It's hard to read this ransom note because it's written supposedly by an illiterate Germanic speaker. And that's how Hauptmann is considered the right person for this crime, because he's German. He was an alien who snuck into the country, an immigrant. Don't tell that to Donald Trump, because you know his problem. He doesn't want immigrants in our country. Yeah, well, it's kind of too late for Hauptmann. They already electrocuted him. But he was an illegal immigrant. He was. And he had a wife and a child, and he was a carpenter. And here is, this is my photo of it, because I've been to the archive and Mark Falzini took the ransom notes out and I was able to photograph them. So here is the signature, the famous signature. The person who wrote this couldn't spell properly and they called it a signature. And it's very weird symbol, and everybody, I mean, decades, people are trying to figure out what this symbol means. There it is up close. It's a red blob, holes, 3 holes. Yes, very weird, the whole thing. So in the archive in New Jersey, the State Museum, they've got these replicas of all the ransom notes. And here's a close-up again of another, there were 12 or 13 notes. Not all of them had this symbol, but most of them did. And these are fragments of the earth around the corpse. The police took samples of the earth, and there were bone fragments in there. Here they are looking at the area where the child's body was later found 80 days later. This is the wanted poster. And what's interesting about the wanted poster is that this photograph is older. The child was much younger in this picture than when he went missing. He had a haircut by the time he went missing. He looked like a little boy and not a baby. He didn't have all those curls. And there he is with his, I suppose that's with his haircut. I'm not sure, but that's him. And here are some headlines. Lindbergh baby kidnapped, father is ready to pay, kidnappers to return baby in few hours. This is going to go on and on and on. And even after the child's body is found, they go on and on. There wasn't a day that headlines or articles on the front page didn't deal with Lindbergh and his problems. And the public was aggravated when they realized that Lindbergh, after the child's body was found, they realized that it was a terrible mistake to allow the father to bungle the entire investigation. They might have found the child earlier, who knows? So here are the 2 men who were driving in a truck on May 12, 1932. And the colored man, Henry Allen is his name, Orville something or other. I'm losing my memory. Anyway, these are the two truckers. The colored man could not use a bathroom anywhere on the road. He had to stop in the middle of the woods and relieve himself, and that is how the child's remains were found. The body was lying in the woods near a burlap sack. And Henry Allen did receive most of the ransom money, the reward money. The governor of New Jersey offered a $25,000 reward. Lindbergh made the governor take the reward away. Lindbergh, as you understand, he did some very weird things showing, when we look at his behavior today, we realize this is not a father who's looking for his child. Neither is he a father who thinks the child is alive. So he made the governor, his name was Harry Moore at that time. The governor of New Jersey in 1932 was Harry Moore, who put out a $25,000 reward, and Lindbergh made him rescind the reward. Later on, there's another governor, Harold Hauptmann, and when the baby's body was found, the governor does put out a reward, and Henry Allen and the other gentlemen receive much of the money. So here is a bird's eye view of the road. Forgot the name of the road. I've been on it many times. Anyway, this is the place where Henry Allen went into the woods to relieve himself and found the child. So you can see the circus is beginning. Everybody wants to see the place. Lindy's baby murdered. And this is what the gold notes look like. When Roosevelt became the president, he moved into the White House in March of 1933. And he immediately took, pretty soon after his presidency, he took us off the gold standard. Everybody had to go to the bank by May of 1932 and turn in their $10 bills and $20 bills that would have these gold certificate seals on them. And they would be given different paper money. So when Lindbergh went to St. Raymond's Cemetery on the evening of April 2nd, I think it was, well, the 2nd or the 3rd, 1932, his child had not yet been found dead. So in April of 32, they were paying off the supposed kidnapper who was writing supposedly all these ransom notes in a German illiterate script. And the guy took the money, $50,000 in cash in a box, and handed them a note, them meaning Lindbergh sat in the car a block or two away from this area of the cemetery. He was sitting in a car with the windows rolled up at the beginning of April 1932. It was still cold, very cold. The other fellow's name is John Francis Condon, otherwise known as Jaffe, a 75-year-old ex-professor who was helping Lindbergh. He went up to the cemetery grounds and handed over $50,000 in cash to a guy behind one of the tombstones. It's like 10 o'clock at night, barely visible. And the guy hands him a note saying, "You'll find the baby in Gay Head Island in Massachusetts." And they never got the baby back, and the $50,000 was gone. But inside the $50,000 wrapped money were gold certificates. The Treasury Department helped Lindbergh. He didn't want their help in this manner. He protested. They were taking the numbers off of the certificates. This is J.P. Morgan's bank. And J.P. Morgan was his father-in-law's partner. Lindbergh married the daughter of a partner of J.P. Morgan. Her father was no longer alive, but J.P. Morgan's bank wouldn't let the money out, and the Treasury agent, Elmer Irie, wouldn't allow Lindbergh to hand over money in a cemetery without taking down the certificate numbers. So they spent a lot of time. Lindbergh protested and didn't want to let it. He said it was going to interfere with getting his child back. No, all they were doing were copying down the serial numbers of every bill. The Treasury agent really knew that eventually will be taken off the gold standard, and that the people with this money will be found out because they're stuck with the money, and they will be caught with the gold seal on the bill. And that's exactly what's going to happen to Richard Hauptmann. That's exactly how he gets caught. Spending money, a $10 bill with a gold seal on it. But right now, there's a bigger problem with this story. Jaffe, John Condon, the 75-year-old man who's helping Lindbergh, he walks up to the cemetery 10 o'clock at night with a box with $50,000 in it, hands it over, and all the guy gives him back, there's only one man, not a gang, and the man gives him an envelope telling them to go look on a boat at Gay Head Island, Cape Cod. So they go. This is Jaffe, John Francis Condon. Here he is, 1860 to 1945. This is the old man who became a go-between for Lindbergh and the supposed kidnappers. He's the only one who supposedly conversed with a kidnapper, talked with him. They call him Cemetery John because they gave him a name John, and they were always meeting in cemeteries. And this is Jaffe's house in the Bronx on Decatur Avenue. See, us Lindbergh people, we go looking through windows. These are the die-hard Lindbergh kidnap freaks like myself. I'm taking this picture so I'm not in it. But many times I look through this window. Don't worry, there's nobody in the house. They were renovating it. We're not peeping Toms. So they're renovating it because they're going to sell it. And there's another view. It's a lovely house, Decatur Avenue. And there are some of us aficionados gathered on a tour with Richard Sloan, the fellow in the red baseball cap. He's giving a tour of the Bronx. Here we are again, all over the Bronx. We go to all the sites. Here we are on the bus. They're reading the Richard Sloan's description and looking at the pictures, and everybody on this bus is anxious to know what happened, when it happened, where it happened. There's Richard Sloan. He was the sound engineer for Peter Jennings' ABC News for 30 years, and he conducted all of these tours for many years. Hauptmann's garage was torn down when the police found $14,000 in ransom bills in the garage, hidden away in the floorboards. Well, they took every nail and every board off. They took it apart, nail by nail. So we stand there and look at the empty space. That's how crazy we are. People like me have been doing this for decades, and we'll stand there and look at an empty space that used to be a garage. We're crazy. That's why, if you're listening to me, you shouldn't get involved in this case. Find something else. JonBenet Ramsey, O.J. Simpson, anything. Don't get involved with Lindbergh because your spouses will divorce you. I'm still married, but who knows? Here we are in a diner. That's me, and this guy just wrote a book, and this is a researcher, another researcher. Oh, we're crazy. We really are. From all over the country, from all over the world, we're attracting other crazy people. Yeah, so this is the view of the nursery from which, this is the window from which somebody supposedly put up a ladder, 3-piece ladder, a 2-piece ladder. Nobody really believes today that anybody climbed a ladder because it was ridiculous to think you had to be an aerialist in a circus to climb that thing up and down. And let's not forget, I didn't tell you, Lindbergh was in the, whoop, okay, I don't know how to go backwards. Lindbergh was in the room below. This is a view from the inside of the house in the stairway leading up to the baby's room. There is another view of it. And this is the window on the left of the fireplace. Here's the window on the right of the fireplace. And these are the French windows. They're two windows closed together, and they were partly opened. Lindbergh claimed he found the note on this windowsill. Ridiculous. Totally ridiculous. And this is the room beneath the baby's nursery. The windows, these two windows are in the same place. The fireplace is in the middle. And out here is a patio. So this is the witness chair in Flemington. It's still there, I guess. They renovated the courthouse. They've done reenactments of the trial there. And this is Curtis, John Curtis, who was put on trial. This is one of the hoaxers who came to Lindbergh from Norfolk, Virginia, to tell Lindbergh that in Norfolk, Virginia, he had contact with the kidnappers. It was a gang. And when they found the child, it wasn't this gang. And John Curtis was put on trial for whatever, for being in contact with the gang. He paid a fine, and I don't even think he served a day in jail. But I'm trying to explain to you that there were 5 trials for the Lindbergh kidnapping in the same courthouse. In this very courthouse, Curtis was tried. Another man, Gaston Means, was tried. Well, here's Gaston Means. He goes to jail. He was an FBI agent in the early days of the FBI. These people, and here's the father and son detectives who were going to go to jail. Ellis Parker and his son, Junior, are going to go to jail for kidnapping somebody and torturing them in a basement to make them confess that they were the criminals to save Hauptmann's life, because Hauptmann was found guilty and everybody was trying to get him off because they knew he had been, well, the detectives, these two detectives, Ellis Parker and Ellis Parker Jr., were working with the new governor of New Jersey, whose name was Harold Hauptmann. Harold Hauptmann did not believe that Hauptmann was guilty or that he did anything alone. He knew something was wrong with the trial, and he figured the police framed him. So these men were in cahoots to get Hauptmann away from the death chair, away from being electrocuted. There was no way to stay the electrocution permanently because in New Jersey, even to this day, the governor does not have the right to stay in electrocution like in the movies with James Cagney. The phone rings and he's already strapped in the electric chair. And the governor calls and he says, well, let's commute the sentence to life in prison. Well, in New Jersey, the governor cannot do that because he's part of a board of pardons. There are 7 people on the board, including the governor, and he's got to have other people agreeing with him. And nobody wanted to agree that Hauptmann might be innocent or that even if he's guilty, he should not be electrocuted because we don't know the full story. Did Hauptmann have accomplices? Many people think he did. And when he died, he didn't confess. He was beaten up. He was tormented. He never confessed. And he said he was totally innocent and he had no accomplices. And he gave an explanation for the money, which you'll hear in a minute. Okay, here is a British, sort of the Walter Cronkite of Great Britain. He wrote a book called The Airman and the Carpenter. Crime of the Century. Well, they changed the name of this book. It was called originally The Airman and the Carpenter. And they made a movie. It's actually a good movie with Stephen Rea and Isabella Rossellini. If you can get to see it, I think it was an HBO film. It is a good movie, pretty good. Ludovic Kennedy wrote this, and he also claimed that Hauptmann was framed. This is a piece of that movie. That's Stephen Rea playing Hauptmann. Lindbergh, The Crime by Noel Bain. Unfortunately, this author passed away right after I got to know him on the telephone. We never got to meet in person. Noel Bain wrote this book that said that Elizabeth, Anne Morrow's sister, was jealous because she married the pilot, the famous hero of the world, and Elizabeth killed the baby. That's Noel Bain. You see where we're going with this. Everybody who writes a book nowadays has another theory, explaining what went wrong, because so much of this is suspicious, so much of it. This is John Logan before he was world famous. He's a famous director in Hollywood. He wrote a play called Hauptmann, and he didn't think Hauptmann was guilty. This is Crime of the Century, the Lindbergh Kidnapping Hoax. Gregory Algren and Stephen Monier collaborated on this book, and they said, as I made my website around this theory, that Lindbergh was a terrible prankster. He did awful things to people and laughed about it. He always wanted to get even with people he didn't like, and he pulled all kinds of weird stuff on them. His best friend came home one night and took a glass of water out of a tank that Lindbergh transferred from water to gasoline. Yes, Lindbergh changed the water to kerosene. And he watched as his friend gulped down a glass of kerosene. That was a prank. He would throw his baby, the one that went missing, he would throw him in the swimming pool to see if he could swim. This is Hour of Gold, Hour of Lead, Anne Morrow Lindbergh's diary, and the pages that deal with this terrible night for her, March 1st, 1932. In that book, she says to her mother, she writes a letter to her mother-in-law who lives in Detroit. She says, when I stood by the crib, I'm paraphrasing, when I stood by the crib and I looked and I saw that it was empty, I thought Charles took him for a joke. And so did Betty Gow. In other words, the mother of this missing child, the nursemaid of the missing child, both looked at the empty crib at 10 o'clock at night. They both put him to bed 7:30 around that time. They put him to bed in a sleeping suit with a handmade t-shirt underneath. They tied him down with the safety pins to the mattress and they put the thumb guards on him. He couldn't have climbed out by himself under those conditions, and now he's missing. And what did the mother and the nursemaid think when they looked at the crib? Well, if you get a copy of this book, which is available in any public library, and you look at that night, what she wrote to her mother-in-law, she says, Betty and I thought he was playing a joke. Now, think about this, because nobody did until Algren and Monier wrote their book, until the kidnapping, Lindbergh Kidnapping Hoax was published. Nobody realized what Algren and Monier had discovered, that the mother and the nursemaid assumed that the father was playing a joke by kidnapping him. Why? Why did they think that? Was the question of their book. And that, I think, when you think about it long enough, you come to realize that the only way they could have thought it was a prank is if he had done it before. Had Charles Lindbergh kidnapped his own child as a prank before? Guess what? He sure did. It turns out that he did that more than once. He scared the household, he scared the servants, He scared his wife. Can you imagine having a child and being told he's kidnapped, only to find out an hour later that he's been hidden by the father in a trash closet in the house? Imagine what a woman goes through when she hears her child is missing and the father was pulling a joke on his wife and the servants. And he did this more than once. So that night, on March 1st, 1932, nobody believed the child was missing. Anne says to her mother-in-law, I really thought it was a joke until he called the police. Her husband had never done that before. He'd never hidden the child and played a joke about it being kidnapped and then called the police. No, he never did that before, evidently. But when he did call the police, Anne knew it was real. But they searched the house anyway. Couldn't believe. This is my website. So Bruno Richard Hauptmann wrongly executed April 3rd, 1936, and that's what my website looks like. I got hundreds of documents there, and it's a lot of fun, but it's more than 20 years already, and I have to finish my book, and then you'll find out what I think. Here we are in Cortlandt Park in the Bronx on one of Richard Sloane's tours, and somebody recreated the ladder, and this is what it looks like. And here's one of us crazy people. It's quite a heavy ladder. And this is Governor Hoffman. He didn't believe Richard Hauptmann did this alone. He didn't believe Richard Hauptmann should go to the electric chair. And for that, he was excoriated in the press. People were calling for his impeachment. To the day he died, he was still researching and sending out detectives looking for answers to the question. Now, think about it. If there are so many questions about the death of a child, the kidnapping death of a child, why would you want to put anybody in the electric chair? So there he is. He died in 1954. He was a young man and he was involved in a scandal. This is Richard Hauptmann. Bruno dies, fails to talk, never confessed. This is my friend Sieglinde. She's at the tombstone in Leipzig, Germany. And the man who died here, who's buried here, is the man that Hauptmann claimed gave him the money. As you can see, there's Yiddish written on the tombstone. His name was Isidor Fisch. Richard Hauptmann was not Jewish, but his partner in getting rich quick scam, not scams, but on the borderline, Richard Hauptmann had a Jewish partner, Isidor Fisch, and together they were in the fur business and the stock market business and the mortgage business. Richard just wanted to be a rich guy, and so did Isidor Fisch, who was much younger than him. Well, one day, this is the Fisch story from the trial. Everybody made fun of it, but I believe it's true. Isidor Fisch was going back to Germany to be with his Jewish family. He had consumption, he had tuberculosis, and he was going home. He never comes back because he dies in Leipzig, and he's buried there. But he handed Richard a shoebox tied with string and asked Richard to keep a bunch of things for him in the attic, to keep furs in a, I don't remember exactly what he gave him, a bunch of things because Isidor left his boarding room and wasn't coming back for a long time. So he emptied it out and he asked Richard if he could hold the stuff for him. And one of the things was a shoebox tied with string, which is later going to get wet from a roof that leaks above the closet. Everything gets wet. Richard Hauptmann notices when the box is made of cardboard, it's falling apart. There's money in it, lots and lots and lots of money. And Richard noticed the gold seals on the $20 bills and the $10 bills, and he had to be very careful because the deadline for turning in this money that Franklin Roosevelt had put an end to the gold backing of the dollar, the gold seal money had to be taken back to the bank and exchanged. But Richard Hauptmann, an illegal alien, wasn't going to go near any bank with that kind of money, $14,000. And he just kept spending the money little by little. And that is how they caught him, because one of the gold $10 bills ended up at the bank. The cashier at the end of the day noticed that the serial number was on a list, and they caught Richard. So that was his fish story. Isidore Fish had given him a box of money, and here is Lindbergh at the trial giving his false testimony. Why do I say false? Because remember I told you that Lindbergh was sitting in a car a block and a half away from a cemetery, St. Raymond's in the Bronx. At 10 o'clock at night, Jaffe, John Francis Condon, the 75-year-old schoolteacher, took a box from Lindbergh's car, walked over a block and a half to the cemetery in the dark of night, handed this money for an envelope with a note inside that said, "The baby is on the boat Nellie." The boat in Cape Cod was called Nellie. They should go look for it there. Well, here's the problem. Lindbergh was in the car with the windows rolled up. After they caught Hauptmann, Lindbergh told the cops, "I could never recognize a voice," because supposedly the man behind the tombstone who took the money said, "Hey, Doc, hey, Doc." That's what Jaffe told the police. John Francis Condon said the man called out, "Hey, Doc." Lindbergh said he heard, "Hey, Doc." When the police caught Hauptmann, they asked him, "Can you remember the man's voice?" And Lindbergh said to the grand jury, he says, "How am I supposed to remember? I couldn't remember." But then when Lindbergh found out that Bruno Richard Hauptmann had $14,000 in a shoebox or hidden in his garage, for some reason that's very, very suspicious, Lindbergh changed his mind. "Oh yes, that's the man's voice that I heard in the cemetery." Now this trial that he's sitting at is January and February 1935. He handed that, Jaffe was in the cemetery in April 1932. So that's what, 3 years ago? Did I do the math correctly? You think he's supposed to, he claims that he recognizes 2 words, 4 words. Let's say it was even 10 words or 20 words. How does a man have the nerve to sit in that chair and tell the jury that that man, the defendant, is the same voice I heard in the cemetery? It's not humanly possible. There have been essays, articles by doctors, by lawyers, even the uneducated people reading the newspaper of the day understood it isn't possible. No human has that kind of hearing. And by the way, speaking of hearing, it's most likely that Lindbergh was already deaf. If any of you have ever been in an open cockpit, old-fashioned airplane of the 20s and 30s, I have been in one, several of them, you cannot hear yourself think. The engines are so loud, and Lindbergh flew practically every day in the 20s and 30s. He flew so often, he was deaf. Later on, we know he couldn't hear his daughter in the 40s. She wrote a book and said that he had to lean over and listen. So perhaps in 1935, he was already deaf from the airplane engines. But even if he wasn't deaf, even if he had the sharpest hearing, how did that jury, because they're going to tell the news reporters when they put him in the electric chair, that the reason they found him guilty was that Lindbergh believed he was guilty. How do you put a man in the electric chair based on that testimony? It's so outrageous. And well, this is the wood in the attic. It didn't fit right, so they drew pictures in between the 2 pieces of wood, and they said, use your imagination. And Governor Hauptmann reopened the case. After the jury was finished finding him guilty, Governor Hauptmann reopened the case. Hauptmann was not yet electrocuted. And the day it was discovered, December 5th, 1935, Anne Morrow wrote in her diary, "We are leaving the country and we may not come back." And they were frightened. Lindbergh was frightened that the governor of New Jersey was reinvestigating the case. So they live in England. Lindbergh goes to Germany and gets a medal from Hitler. Then they try to resurrect his reputation in the 50s. He becomes, this is America First. There is Lindbergh in the late 30s, early 40s, pledging allegiance in the Hitler-type salute. America First Committee was an isolationist organization that didn't want to fight Charles Lindbergh in the battle against American intervention. He made anti-Semitic speeches, and these are some of the books you could read about this one's about Henry Ford and Charles Lindbergh, two of the biggest anti-Semites in America. And Philip Roth wrote this one, in which it's a novel in which Lindbergh becomes president of the United States. And okay, so I hope I confused you. I don't know if you got anything out of this crazy story. But maybe I'll be back and do a sequel. And when my book is finished, hopefully at the end of the summer, I'll explain more about all of this. So have a good quarantine, and I'll be back. Thank you, everybody.